I was all set for friend's wedding that crisp, sunny afternoon, dressed in my sharpest suit, a carefully chosen gift tucked under my arm, and a spring in my step that had me convinced nothing could go wrong. The city was bustling, and I navigated the busy streets with the excitement of someone about to celebrate love. Little did I know that fate had a peculiar twist planned for me that day. The venue was an impressive banquet hall, the kind that hosted multiple events simultaneously. Its soaring ceilings, elegant chandeliers, and polished marble floors exuded sophistication. As I stepped inside, I took in the scene, clusters of well-dressed guests mingling, soft laughter, and murmurs of anticipation. I scanned the room for familiar faces, assuming I'd soon be swept up in the joyful atmosphere of a wedding celebration. However, the ambience felt oddly subdued. There was an undercurrent of quiet introspection that I couldn't quite place. I found a seat toward the back of the room, hoping to blend in until I could size up the situation a little better. As I sat, I noticed that many guests seemed lost in thought, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. I rationalized it as typical wedding emotion. Perhaps someone was overwhelmed by the beauty of the event, or maybe a bittersweet goodbye was part of the ritual. I tried to dismiss the uneasy feeling that crept in, attributing it to my own pre-wedding jitters. After a few minutes, the lights dimmed and the room hushed in anticipation of a slideshow. I leaned forward in my seat, expecting images of the happy couple's journey together. But what unfolded on the screen was anything but wedding-like. There, in a series of soft-focus photographs, was an elderly man, smiling broadly, laughing with family, and striking poses that spoke of decades of memories and love. The pictures were warm and filled with genuine emotion, yet something was off. I squinted at the screen, trying to reconcile the joyous expressions with the somber mood in the room. Then, as if a veil was lifted, the truth crashed over me. These weren't wedding photos at all. They were a tribute, a life celebrated, now quietly mourned. I had mistakenly wandered into a funeral. In that heart-stopping moment, panic surged through me. I wanted nothing more than to rise, excuse myself, and vanish into the crowd unnoticed. But my inherently awkward nature and fear of drawing attention held me captive in my seat. What if leaving abruptly made my mistake more obvious? So, I sat frozen, my mind racing as I grappled with the absurdity of the situation. As I sat there, a gentle, yet sorrow-laden voice whispered from beside me. Leaning in close, a woman, her eyes red from crying, softly said, "Thank you for coming. Dad talked about you often." Her words sent a jolt of shock through my entire being. I blinked rapidly, struggling to process the implication. Who was I to be mentioned in such intimate familial terms? I hadn't met this man, and yet here I was, caught in a web of mistaken identity. My heart pounded as I forced a reply. Of course. He was a great man, I managed, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. In that moment, my accidental presence had inadvertently cast me in the role of a close acquaintance or mentee, a role I neither belonged to nor wanted. I felt as if I were trapped in a scene from a movie, where every second stretched into an eternity of awkward silence and internal dread. The room's atmosphere, already heavy with grief, seemed to tighten around me. Before I could even begin to extricate myself from this strange predicament, a microphone was passed around for guests to share their memories and heartfelt stories about the departed. My mind screamed for me to slip away unnoticed, but fate had other plans. As the microphone made its way to me, my pulse quickened to a near unbearable rhythm. Standing up felt like an act of bravery laced with desperation. My legs trembled, and beads of cold sweat formed along my forehead. I took the microphone with shaking hands, and without a moment to collect my thoughts, I blurted out, "He always said, do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life." I could hear a ripple of approving murmurs sweep through the room. Faces turned toward me, nodding as if I had delivered a profound, time-honored adage. In that instant, I hoped fervently that my impromptu tribute would suffice to fill the void of my unintentional intrusion. The next several minutes, or was it longer, time had a way of distorting itself in that surreal space. I sat back down, feeling simultaneously relieved that I'd spoken and mortified at the realization that my words were likely nothing more than a desperate improvisation. Around me, guests continued to share stories of the man whose life had clearly left an indelible mark on everyone present. I listened, my mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions, guilt for my presence, curiosity about this stranger's life, and a lingering desire to escape. Every now and then, I caught snippets of conversations that painted a picture of a man who was not only a pillar in his community, but also a mentor to countless young professionals. Stories of his generosity, his wisdom, and the subtle humor he carried through his years filled the room. I found myself involuntarily drawn into his narrative, a narrative I was never meant to be a part of. It was as if, in that very room, I was being woven into the fabric of his legacy, despite the fact that our lives had never intersected. At one point, as I sat silently absorbing the profound loss that hung in the air, an older gentleman approached me. His expression was a blend of sympathy and earnest warmth, and he placed a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "He'd be proud of you, son," he said in a soft, gravelly voice that resonated with genuine care. In that moment, his words struck me like a double-edged sword, comforting yet laden with irony. Here I was, an accidental interloper, receiving praise for qualities I wasn't sure I even possessed. It was as if the universe was nudging me, affirming that even in the strangest of circumstances, a connection could be forged, however fleeting. The gravity of the situation slowly sank in. I realized that I was now part of an unplanned ritual of remembrance, a ritual that celebrated a life I had only known through borrowed glimpses and the reverence of those who cherished him. The accidental role I'd been thrust into felt both invasive and strangely humbling. Every tear shed by a grieving friend, every anecdote shared with a heavy heart, reminded me that life's twists are rarely predictable, and sometimes, the most unexpected moments leave the deepest impressions. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of emotional turbulence, the ceremony began to wind down. The room, though still heavy with sorrow, started to disperse into smaller clusters of quiet conversation. Seizing the opportunity, I excused myself with a murmured apology and slipped toward the exit. Each step away from the hall felt like shedding a layer of the day's surreal weight, a weight that had, for a brief period, altered the trajectory of my life. Once outside, the cool air hit me like a wave, and I paused to collect my thoughts. I leaned against the side of the building, staring blankly at the sky as I tried to reconcile the bizarre events of the past hour. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the absurdity of it all. A simple misstep had led me into a profound encounter with grief, legacy, and the unpredictable nature of human connection. As I walked away, my mind replayed the day's events over and over. The image of that elderly man's smiling face, the gentle murmur of the eulogies, and the kind yet puzzling words of the older gentleman. All of it lingered like a surreal dream. I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the discomfort and the chaos, I had witnessed something deeply human. In that accidental moment, I had been granted a glimpse into the ways in which lives intertwine, even in the most unexpected circumstances. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the experience with a mixture of regret, awe, and a newfound sensitivity to the fragility of identity. I had entered that banquet hall with the intention of celebrating a wedding, a celebration of love, joy, and new beginnings. Instead, I had become an unintentional participant in a farewell, a final tribute to a life well lived. The memory of that day serves as a reminder that life's most profound moments are often unplanned, and that sometimes, the roles we find ourselves playing are not the ones we ever intended to audition for. Now, every time I catch a glimpse of a suit or hear a soft whisper of funeral, I can't help but feel a shiver of recognition. I've since sworn off attending any event that requires formal attire, not out of disdain for the elegance of a suit, but because it now carries with it the ghost of that surreal day, a day when I accidentally honored a stranger, when I was briefly mistaken for someone who had shared a deep connection with a man I'd never met, and when I learned that even the most unintended moments can leave an indelible mark on one's soul. It was a day of unplanned encounters and emotional upheaval, a day that challenged my notions of identity and forced me to confront the unpredictable intersections of life. And while I may never fully shake the memory of that accidental farewell, I've come to appreciate the strange beauty of life's detours. After all, sometimes the most profound lessons are learned not through careful planning, but through the raw, unfiltered experiences that catch us completely off guard.